Today's guest is Renu Arora. She is a UK-based artist with over 15 years experience, and she is a regular contributor on the BBC Radio. She has her own podcast called the Burgundy Book, which is a series of arts podcasts following a life-changing accident along with a near-death experience in 2017. Renu, thank you very much for joining me today. I really appreciate you.
Jeff, thank you for having me on the show. I'm very grateful to be here.
My audience likes to hear about near-death experiences. So if you don't mind, let's just jump right into it.
Sure. So thank you for that lovely introduction. It was 29th of March 2017, and I was coming home from an acting job, and I'd been unwell for about a year before that with quite severe glandular fever. And I told my team that was going to be my last day for a while because I was really quite sick. And, I was quite stubborn as a person before the accident. So I kind of believed that the universe was kind of whacking me over the head going, you won't really take as much time off as you need. So we're going to whack you over the head with a great big accident. So you have to take time off and rest. So I'd come home and I planned to make a curry with one of my closest friends that evening. And she used to be my old housemate. We were very good friends, and she'd moved out to get married, but she still worked in the area. So she was still living close by. So I texted her and I'd said, let's still have our evening, but I'm exhausted from working. And, she knew I was unwell. And my phone's lost its battery. So she was like, don't worry, I can help you chop the ingredients to make our curry. Don't worry, it's fine. So I said, okay, there's no battery. I'll see you back in the flat in sort of 20 minutes time. I'll just go buy the ingredients. Yep, all fine. So I walked out and went to the shop, which is sort of 4 or 5 doors down the road, got my ingredients in my basket. And as I went to pay, I realized that the queue was extending more or less outside the shop. And it shocked me. I thought, this is very weird. It's 6 o'clock in the evening on the 29th of March. It's not Christmas. It's not New Year. It's not Diwali. There's no Jewish festival. We live in a Jewish area. Why is there a massive queue? And I thought, well, I haven't got my phone with me. My friend knows I've been unwell. She could potentially be at my door waiting, and I've got no way of telling her that I'm safe, okay, in the shop, just sort of about to pay for my chilies, as it were. So I went to the cashiers who know me well because I've been living here for so long, and I just said, can I leave my basket on the counter whilst I just go and wave to my friends who they also knew well? And they said, yeah, they were like, fine. So I left my basket on the counter and just walked out to the pavement. There is a bus stop obscuring my view, but it was 6 in the evening. It wasn't dark. So I thought I can see enough through it to look up the pavement in the direction that she'd be walking in, put my arm up in the air, signal that I'd be in the shop safe, and that would be that. I couldn't see her. So I walked towards the edge of the pavement a bit further, looked up the road, looked through the bus stop, still couldn't see my friend. And we live on a very busy road in the middle of North London, and you can hear buses because they're noisy, they're big and they're noisy. And as I walked out a few moments earlier, there was no bus coming. So I still thought there was nothing, there's a bus lane there, and I thought there was no bus coming. I thought I was safe to put my foot over the edge. So I walked towards the edge of the pavement more to get a better view into the pavement, and put my foot just over the edge of the pavement to get a better view into the pavement. And as I did, a bus was clearly coming in, which I hadn't heard, caught the edge of my boot and started to drag my foot and leg underneath the wheel of this bus. And I then toppled over, obviously, and I was watching my lower leg and foot be dragged under the wheel of the bus, and I could see my leg disappear very slowly underneath. Well, it felt like it was slow. It wasn't slow, it was very fast, but it felt like it was slow. I was watching my leg disappear underneath the wheel of the bus, and I remember thinking to myself, how much of me and how much of my leg is this bus going to take? Because, the wheel was coming closer and closer as my leg was getting, disappearing underneath the wheel. And I remember thinking, I think I'm dead. I think these are my final moments of my life. I think I'm a goner.
It's amazing how your brain speeds up or something where it makes what happens slow down.
Yeah.
So I find that amazing that you witnessed all this. Well, wow, there goes my leg underneath the bus. I am surprised. Well, I guess I'm not really surprised, but it's interesting that you were not in any pain, were you?
No. So I didn't have pain for quite some time, partly because I had an NDE, which I obviously can go into in a moment, but also because of the fact that and I've read this from other people that have had sort of serious automobile accidents or, shark attacks or whatever, where, I read an interview by a woman whose head was caught in the mouth of a grizzly bear. She was American, I think. And she said she felt no pain but an enormous amount of pressure like a vice because the bear's teeth were around her neck. And I felt exactly the same thing, that there was an enormous amount of pressure because the bus is 10 tons. So I felt like my foot and leg had been absolutely flattened at that moment. And I remember thinking, oh, my foot feels like paper. I remember thinking it feels like a sheet of paper. It's that flat. Mm-hmm. And also my whole being at that point was beginning to be adrenalized, full of cortisol and shock chemicals and, all sorts of things. And I could feel shock chemicals swimming into my body, both into my head and into my lower leg and foot. And I remember thinking, this is really interesting because, on the one hand, I can feel myself drowning in shock. And on the other hand, I can feel the chemicals just literally collect in my foot like a pool of lava. So the pain didn't start until quite a while later, until the NDE had happened, until there was enough commotion that the bus driver knew that I was underneath him and reversed off me and freed me, and the emergency services arrived. So it was a good sort of 10, 15 minutes at least before any pain began to register in my brain and in my foot at all. It's interesting what the brain, as you say, kind of remembers and what happens to the brain in times of shock and trauma. So I remember seeing a program where a lady had been involved in a shark attack. She was in the sea, and she describes it, and she says, I remember the shark had taken my leg, the whole of my leg, in its mouth. And I looked down, and she said, I heard a pop, and I looked down and my leg had gone.
Wow.
And whilst I was underneath the wheel of the bus, I remember there's like for me, there was like an animalistic instinct to get free. I remember thinking, I don't care if I lose my leg. I just don't want to lose my life. I just want to get free. So I thought mistakenly that I could pull myself free from underneath the wheel of this bus. Obviously, you can't, because you against the bus, you've got no chance. But I kept pulling, thinking I could get myself free. And I remember thinking, oh, there's movement. There was no movement. I was just clearly breaking my bones inside whilst I was trying to pull. And I also remember that image of the woman that was involved in the shark attack come to mind. And I remember saying to myself, if you pull any more, you're going to hear a pop and your leg will be left underneath the wheel of the bus and you'll definitely die.
Wow.
You will disconnect from it. So I just had to surrender, and just kind of go, okay, there's nothing I can do in this moment but allow myself to surrender to what is, because the more I struggle, the more I'm going to injure myself and risk losing my life.
I know this is a side note, but I just still keep getting curious. Do you know why there was a big lineup outside the building in the first place?
I've never found out. I don't know. That's a really good question. And I still live in this area, so maybe next week I'll go to that shop and find out. I don't know.
I don't know. It's off the story, but I just had to ask. So
it could be because they were short-staffed in the shop that day, and so potentially what happened.
Oh, is it possible that that was 2017. That's BC, before COVID, because here in the stores, a lot of times they limit the amount of people going in, so you have to line up outside. Yeah. So I thought, okay, maybe
same here in Britain.
Yeah, but that's too far before.
No.
All right. Yeah. So did you feel like you had the NDE soon at some point? I was thinking maybe that you were trying to get away and then you just got away as if you popped out of your body, but
I did.
Is that how it happened?
Yeah. Well, actually, the NDE happened before the pulling happened. So what had happened was, at the time of impact, I started to eject because at the time of impact, I still felt like I was standing up. So I hadn't computed in my mind what had happened, and I still felt my feet firmly on the ground, like I was standing up vertical with my arm in the air, waving to my friend. I still felt myself like there was like an imprint of my soul that was still standing up, or my body that was still standing up. And that's where the disconnect started to happen really quickly after the impact. So after I kind of thought I was standing up. I remember ejecting my body, literally like just popping out, as you say, beautifully, and just floating and rising above my body. And I was rising really fast. And I remember seeing the top of the red bus and looking at my leg underneath the wheel of the bus and just going, oh, that's me. That's really interesting. There was no regret. There was nothing. There was no sense of sadness, happiness. It just kind of was. And then I kind of didn't look down anymore and was looking up. And the higher I floated, the more this world seemed to fall away. But as I was floating up, I remember thinking that my wingspan was the whole of my borough. We have boroughs here in London, the whole of my borough, which is like a town, and back and more. And I remember feeling like I wasn't physical form. I was like this energy, this presence, and it was kind of light and with a white in shade, and it was very, very warm, and it felt very loving. And I remember feeling that I'm everyone and everything and everybody's thoughts and my thoughts, and it was really, really interesting. And then, as I say, the higher I floated, the more this world seemed to float away. And I remember actually seeing shards of light, like coming at me, beaming at me from all directions, and just entering into my heart, beaming into my heart and bathing my heart like a star with love. It was absolutely just beautiful. And I remember seeing these shards of light, and I was at the center of these shards of light. It just felt so love-filled. And in that moment, I felt like my heart was taken out of my chest, literally given a beautiful, beautiful polish to the point where it was sparkling and filled up with love, and then put back in. And I remember hearing a voice which was on the right-hand side of me, and it sounded like a male voice, and it felt like a very familiar voice that I'd known perhaps my whole life. And it felt like felt like I'd accessed God in that moment. And the voice said, "Love is all there is." And it was so strong and profound. I'll never forget it, because it boomed through me. And I remember feeling and thinking, that's God, but that's also me. Because of the way that the voice literally boomed through me, it just felt like the voice was me, even though it wasn't, because it reverberated inside every aspect of my presence, my energy field. And then I also heard the same voice, but another message that was, give love, give love, give love, because love is all there is.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I've done quite a few of these podcasts, and one of the similarities is when they hear a voice, it's usually booming like that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I'm going to have to take closer note at this, because I just noticed you said it was on your right side. And I think that's a common thing too, that it's usually on the person's right side. And I wonder why that is.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Oh.
Like I said, I'm going to have to kind of remember these things now. I'm a little more fine details, but that's interesting. So you heard this voice. I'm assuming you felt like unconditional love.
Oh my gosh, it was unbelievable. It was really, really beautiful. I felt so much. I've never felt that much love in my entire life. And it wasn't a human love. It was like an essential being kind of love that I knew, because I knew I was filled up with love at that moment. And I knew also that, if I did go back onto the earth, that love would never get depleted, because it's not a human love where you give and it's gone. It was an essential being type of love that I knew would just always stay. I just needed to access it all the time, It was really quite remarkable.
Did you stay up there for a while, or were you given the option to come back, or what happened?
So I did stay up there for a little longer, and I had a really beautiful life review. I can't really go into it too much because I'm reserving that part of the NDE for my podcast, the Burgundy Book, which is going to be out next year. So I apologize for that. No thank you. And so after that had happened, the second part of my NDE, I'll just go back for a second. I really feel like my soul grew 25 lifetimes in that moment. I remember seeing the numbers 25 in yellow and black, and I remember feeling, oh, that's interesting. It's as if it's transcended so many lifetimes.
What do you mean you grew lifetimes? I don't understand.
Well, I felt like I believe that we come into this earth and we come to learn lessons, and we reincarnate and continue to learn lessons. And so I feel like the my lessons were literally transcended 25 lifetimes, as if some of the old, well, a lot of the old conditioning that I'd had before the accident had just been reset in a single moment, you know.
Wow.
And that actually has happened. I did carry a lot of limiting beliefs around myself, around what I believed was possible for me, around my own sense of self-worth, which was just non-existent before the accident. And it just felt like that whole experience had literally broken it, you know, loosened some of it, but broken most of it, which was really interesting, to the point where I could see clearly through and go, oh, there's now another way, which I never saw before.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I want to make a joke, but I don't. I'm saying if you want to level up 25 lifetimes, then go get hit by a bus. But I'm just kidding. Nobody don't do that.
No, please don't do that.
Yes.
So you asked about having a choice. I didn't have a choice, because what had happened was, after the beautiful life review that I experienced, I screamed, and the scream literally pulled me back into my body like a Hoover. So I only feel like I screamed the last millisecond of the scream, because the first bit was when I was out of my body.
I'm sorry. Let me ask that again. What caused you to scream? Seeing your life review, or recognizing you're under the bus?
I must have realized at that point that I started to come back, but not realized it, and obviously felt this sense of panic and screamed, and the physical scream pulled my spirit, my soul back into my just after the life review had ended.
So you weren't even given a choice. You were just put back in. And maybe
I was literally hoovered back in.
And maybe that message was just a reminder or a message to take with you.
You mean the message that I felt when I was doing in the NDE?
Yeah, the one about everything is love, or
yes.
Yeah, maybe that was a message for you to take back.
Yeah, I do feel like that. Yeah, very much so. Because obviously it's a voice that I'll always remember for the rest of my life. And I can, as you said, if people's experiences of NDEs are that the voice is booming, it's not a voice that one can forget, because I've never heard a voice like it in this lifetime, in the physical plane, ever. And I, may or may not ever again in this lifetime. And so I'll never, ever, ever forget it.
And what I think is very interesting is that it was a male voice. So we know it wasn't your own thoughts producing that.
Yeah, I mean, I know that there's been lots of studies to suggest that some of the aspects of one's NDE can take on a form that the experiencer is comfortable with, or the experiencer's beliefs are in line with. So it could have been because I had always assumed God to be, a male presence. It could be that. Or it could just be that it was just an ever-present loving voice that I'm categorizing as male because it was quite deep, but it might not be. Because it sounded very deep in its tone, and also very, very loving. Very, very loving. I felt like I was held by this voice.
Please forgive me if I'm wrong, but I'm speculating that you're Hindu, because I saw in one of your pictures you had the little dot here.
I am.
You're Hindu.
Yeah,
so
I am.
If you are just a weekend Hindu or hardcore, but is it possible for you that voice was Krishna?
Oh, wow. Do you know, that's not something I've considered at all. Not at all. Am I a weekend Hindu? Yeah, I suppose I am a diluted Hindu. Shamefully in some respects. Could have been Krishna. Yes, very much so.
But it was speaking to you in English. Yes. Do you speak Hindi?
I do speak Hindi, yeah. And actually I saw the words as well as hearing the words.
So you saw
I
them.
saw them on my right as well as hearing them in my right ear.
Interesting. Yeah, you saw them too.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Obviously you're human like the rest of us, and we can't be loving and this perfect person all the time. But do you think it's changed you some, where you are a more loving person now?
Without a doubt. Yeah, I mean, as you say, we're human, and I still react from my beliefs and ego and, patterns all the time, of course, because I'm human. But yeah, what it's done is it opened the door to, I feel like, I know a lot of people will say this, that the veil was lifted on that day. And that, in part, is never gone. So although I'm obviously not in that realm anymore, I do feel like I have access to it now, much, much, much more strongly than I ever did before the accident. So I do feel like I'm more loving, and I feel like I see past people's much more, not always, but much more seeing past their personalities and into their spirit, into their divinity. And that's because I recognize my own divinity, which I didn't before the accident. I was a Hindu, but I was a cognitive Hindu up here. So I understood some of the beliefs and traditions because I'd been taught them and read about them, but I didn't have an experience in my heart. I did have a few experiences of the divine, but it didn't feel like a constant or a consistent feeling of being guided and the oneness that I experienced whilst I was having my NDE. So because it's softened me and made me connect to my divinity and essence and oneness, I'm much more able to see that in other people. And because I respect myself, and there's a real sense of self-love that's been cultivated since the accident for me, I'm much more able to give that to other people. So the love that I feel like I impart on other people, whereas before the accident, looking back, I don't think I would have said that at the time, but looking back, it felt really hollow in comparison to the fullness of love that I feel like I can give now, because it was coming from an empty place, because I felt empty, because I wasn't really able to give myself that sense of self-love.
Mm-hmm. Let me catch a statement and a question here, all right?
Sure.
It says, "Thank you for sharing your story with us. You are very beautiful. Since your experience, have you lived your life differently, and are you treating people differently?"
Yes. A resounding yes to both of those questions. Thank you for your comment. Yeah, my purpose has completely shifted. I mean, I still work as an artist, but, as I was saying to you before we started the podcast, whilst the mediums of my work have slightly shifted because I have mobility issues now with my foot because of the crush injury, the very significant crush injury, I still use my skill set. I do podcasts and radio shows and record soundtracks for shows. So I still use that skill set. It's just in a more potentially auditory or speaking based medium now. Whereas before it was much more sort of physical on the stage, sometimes involving dancing, which, I no longer can do. And also I tell the story, I use the experience, whether it's to tell the story directly or whether it's to put the experience into the work in some way. I use the experience more or less all the time in my work now. And also because I have such a much stronger connection to my heart and to the divine, I'm much more able to allow inspiration and God to speak through me and to shine through me whilst I'm working and also whilst I'm living my life. So I'm much more instinct-based. So if I have a decision to make, I'll feel how it feels in my heart and I'll be pulled to the right thing rather than trying to find my way out of something by going round and round and round in my head that I used to do before the accident and literally give myself an anxiety heart attack. So I'm very different now in how I live my life.
Yeah, I was wondering that not only in love, but within other emotions, maybe you're more in touch with them now. And maybe possibly that would make you even a better actress because you can just feel these different emotions,
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, I do feel like the parts that I've played and the parts that I hopefully will play, but certainly the parts I played since the accident have been much richer and much deeper because my characterization has been much richer because of where I've been at. And you're right, exactly that. I do feel because I opened so quickly and so vastly after the accident, so fully, I can access the whole gamut of emotions much more easily than I could ever do before the accident, which felt much harder to be able to access.
Now that it's been a few years, are you still having any after effects from the NDE?
You mean spiritually?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's evoked a journey that will obviously last the rest of this, this lifetime. And so when I was born, I was a twin. And my twin brother and I arrived 3 months premature. And I was twice his weight. So clearly I was taking all the food in my mum's womb. And because of that, my brother didn't survive. And I've always slightly felt sort of half of a whole, that there's another part of me that, was never quite was never there. And I've always known that. And I had various friends sort of, through my life before the accident channel him, and it was wonderful. And I would say I kind of felt him, but I didn't really have access to him, and I always wanted to, but didn't. But so one of the things that's changed is that I feel much closer to him now after the accident, and I ask him to help me in everything I do, and I can literally feel his presence whenever I'm doing anything significant or doing anything on stage or any kind of public speaking or any performance. And it's interesting because he's also on my right.
Ah, interesting. And yeah, maybe that was his voice.
I've thought that it could have been. Yes. I'll never know, obviously, but yeah, exactly. It could have been. So I do feel like there are after effects all the time. And, for the first year, I know that people say the same thing. For the first year, I became very psychic. So I would have prophetic dreams. I dreamed something and it would sort of come true sort of quite soon after the dream, a conversation or something, sort of mundane or day-to-day would happen. It would be exactly as I dreamt it, with the colors and the sounds, and just so very vivid. So there were a lot of things, a lot of ways that I kind of felt that the NDE affected me then, but also what impacted me then, but also continues to. So I still get quite a lot of those dreams, not as many as I did sort of just after the accident in the early days, but I still do get them. And as I was saying sort of earlier, I feel much more connected to other people's hearts. I see no distinction between me and other people now. I don't see the separation. I mean, I knew that here before the accident, but I didn't feel it here. And now I really do. I feel so connected to other people and plants and animals. It just all feels so present and so one. And the other thing is that when I was experiencing the NDE, and especially going through the life review, I never felt any judgment from God for my past perceived mistakes, which I was judging myself for consistently, and beating myself up like with a hammer, constantly going, you're bad, and coming back and kind of going, oh, so if God isn't judging me, then why am I judging myself? It doesn't make any sense. So much of that has kind of fallen away. So I just feel so much lighter and more aligned, not carrying that baggage and that judgment and that inner turmoil that I lived through before the accident.
Yeah, that's very fascinating. That's pretty profound, just not to judge ourselves so heavily.
Yeah, because it's human nature, and I still do, frequently, but nowhere near as much, and I can catch it much easier now, nowhere near as much as I used to do. I mean, it became my conditioning through which I lived my life, and it was the lens through which I lived my life, this kind of judgment, guilt, and limiting beliefs, and all of that, and it's interesting when you kind of, for me, when I've seen beyond the veil and having experienced that, it's interesting how I feel. In fact, I felt just after the accident that my eyes had opened for the first time in my life, and I was experiencing life like a child does, So I remember actually going to work one morning, probably it must have been about 8 months after the accident, going to do an acting job, and it was very, very early start. So the sun was just beginning to rise. And I remember being in the cab, because I have to take cabs everywhere because of my foot, and being in the cab and just looking out the window, and I remember going, oh, these colors, I've never seen such beautiful colors in my life. And it was just a normal sunrise, but it was absolutely beautiful. And I said to the cab driver, look at this sunrise. It's absolutely remarkable. And he looked over at me and he smiled and he went, you can really feel it, huh? And I went, yeah. And I felt like I was experiencing it for the first time ever.
Did you have any other psychic abilities besides this kind of like premonition and dreams?
Yeah, so sometimes I would get a vision or an image of, they were usually things like conversations or things I'd be doing in the future, various jobs I'd be doing, and they all came true. It's really interesting. Most of them were quite soon after I'd experienced the vision, although a couple of them were a few things that I had done this year, which kind of made, and I was looking back at actually a journal that I'd written after the accident only a few days ago, and I remember actually doing, I remember writing down a vision and a dream that I'd had about doing a show on BBC Radio with a very specific spoken word piece with a very specific song. And I remember I actually sang, I remember the song because I often write songs in my sleep. I've always done that with my work. I kind of wake up with a song in my mind. So I recorded the song in my phone, and I thought, I wonder if this is going to come true. This is really interesting. Forgot about it, obviously. And then this week, when I was looking at my journal, I read that account of what had happened. I went back to my phone to find that voice note, listen to the song, and it was exactly the song that I put in the radio show.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, wow, I'd forgotten about it.
Yeah. Well, that one's amazing. Before the accident, have you ever had any spiritual or paranormal experiences?
Yeah, a few. So, when I was 8 years old, my first experience of singing was when I was 8 years old, and I was going to audition for the school Christmas nativity play, school Christmas show. And I'd never sung before in my life because I was quite a shy kid, but I just knew in my heart that I wanted to sing. Never knew if I could, but I just knew I wanted to. So auditions had come around, and I knew I wanted to audition for the show, and I literally kind of threw my arm in the air. And because I was quite a shy child, I wasn't picked to audition, and I was devastated. So I made a big fuss in the classroom, and I went, "No, you have to let me audition. You can't stop the audition session. I have to audition." So they went, "Oh, all right then," probably thinking, this kid. And I sang, and I remember at that point, similar to the NDE, but obviously in a very different circumstance, I remember popping out of my body and watching myself sing. And I remember thinking to myself, where's this voice coming from? It sounded confident and alien to me, and powerful and beautiful. And I remember thinking, you've never sung before, and suddenly you've got this voice that everybody is having to watch you. And I felt like a magnet. Everybody's eyes were on me like a magnet. And it just felt so very profound. And I remember thinking, I've touched God. I don't know how, but I've touched God by singing for the first time in my life. And it was at that moment that I thought, I want to do this for the rest of my life. I want to work in the arts in some capacity. And obviously I did. So that was one thing. And another thing was when I was probably 10 years old, I remember walking into my parents' bedroom, and I'd always had a kind of a penchant for spirituality, like an interest in spirituality. I suppose because being brought up in a Hindu family, mystical conversations were common in our household. So I remember looking at my parents and having a vision, and looking at my parents and going, "Mom, Dad, I chose you." And they went, "What?"
Oh, wow.
I said, "I chose you." And they probably thought I was saying, "Mom, Dad, I love you." And I was, but I was saying something far deeper. And I remember kind of having a vision of, in my 10-year-old imagination, being in that other realm and looking down and seeing these two people, and just kind of saying to myself, these are the two people that I need to be my parents, to teach me what I need to teach me and to learn in this lifetime to help my soul to grow. I actually remember that at 10 years old. Really quite amazing.
Interesting. I'm going to give you an experience for me, and I wonder if it's the same for you, because I know you're in touch with your emotions more. I'm a musician, but I don't play much anymore. But when I used to play out, sometimes when I would play out, when the music is tight, the crowd is great, there's just like almost, it becomes, and they don't last even through an entire song, but moments in song, it almost becomes a spiritual experience. It's almost like everything is perfect, the energy is amazing, and it almost gives you a chilling feeling. And I wish I could interview top-level musicians to see if they feel the same thing, but it's almost an indescribable spiritual experience. So I wonder now, since you're maybe you've had that before anyways, being an actor, because I'm not an actor and I wouldn't know, but when you're really in the role and being this person, is there any change since the NDE when you're in the role of this person that it becomes somewhat of like a spiritual experience compared to what it was before?
Jeff, that's a really beautiful question. And no, it's true. And just before I answer, can I just respond to what you were saying about the mystical, I forget how you put it, but it was really lovely, moments on stage when you can feel, how did you put it?
It's like synchronicity and energy and perfection. I don't know.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I can imagine, well, I don't imagine, I know that's potentially what most, if not all, musicians feel when they're in that zone. It's just like touching something divine, like just time slows. And I think that's what Deepak Chopra calls Dharma, like, when you're in your flow,
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I can be in my studio space working on a piece of music or a piece of spoken word for 12 hours straight and not come up to breathe and not come up to eat and just forget about the fact that I have a body even that needs fueling and needs kind of, all the stuff that bodies need, because I'm so very in that flow. And although I had that before the accident, it was never as deep, and I could never go as deep. And I think that's because I was so very much in my head, and and just wasn't able to connect to even myself. And of course, the self is where the divine is. It's here, isn't it? But I just didn't know that I was always trying to attain that oneness from the outside of me. If I get the next thing, if I do the next job, chasing the next paycheck, prioritizing the wrong things. So as a result, my attention was always outside, never inside. And it's interesting because I know this is slightly a tangent, but I think hopefully it'll be relevant to your audience, that just after the accident, when before my injuries were properly diagnosed and treated, I remember thinking to myself, this is really interesting because the world is still spinning, but mine isn't. And I remember thinking, the world doesn't stop turning because mine is still. And although everybody was on the merry-go-round, everybody else and friends and family, I had no wish to get back on it in that moment, because I'd known I'd broken. Literally, I'd known I'd broken. And I kind of wanted to, for months before the accident, because I was so ill and I'd put all these defenses up. I remember dreaming and praying to God, I just need to break. I just need to break. And obviously I had, in a big way. So kind of coming back to those first 5 weeks after the accident, I remember thinking to myself, this is interesting, because if we can't go out, the only way is inside. So whilst I can't travel on the outside, I will need to travel on the inside, because that's the only journey I can now make, the journey inside. And I remember having conversations with friends, and in the beginning, I felt this sort of disconnect, that they were traveling metaphorically, so fast on the outside with their busy lives. And I remember thinking and sometimes saying to them, but I'm traveling really fast on the inside. Just can't see it.
Oh, that's interesting. Some of the themes that you have spoke of your experience kind of align. I mean, obviously with Christianity, one of the biggest things is love. And I think that's what obviously with all religions, but some of the oneness that you experienced, I'm not sure if that's more Hindu or Buddhism, but regardless, have you had any more interest in Hinduism since your NDE?
Yes, I feel like I've taken a much deeper interest in learning about it. I feel like an absolute novice in the things that I do know, because I've only really taken an interest in the past sort of couple of years since having the NDE, and it's been with conversations with my parents, especially my dad, who is a fountain of knowledge. Well, they both are, but especially my dad. So, excuse me. So I do feel like I've taken a much keener interest and a stronger interest, because I want to understand more about the faith and more about the ideals and more about the ideology and where the mythology comes from. And it does spark my interest when I'm listening to it. It doesn't make me want to put my NDE through the lens of Hinduism, but it does certainly make me want to understand more of my heritage and my roots, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
All right. So you have your new podcast, but it's not out yet, right?
Oh.
It's going to be coming out, and that's called the Burgundy Book. So
it is.
Hopefully people will be able to find it when it's ready. Do you have any other projects that you're working on? Like, have you considered writing a book about your experience, or is there anything else you would like us to know about?
Thank you for that question. Yes. So just to kind of go back to the Burgundy Book. So although it's not out, the teasers are out. So the teasers are public. So they're on the libsyn page. If you type in the Burgundy Book /libsyn, maybe we can put the link in the show notes beneath the show.
Okay. Is there a website, or what was that called? You said the Burgundy Book.
Oh, sorry. So Libsyn is the hosting site for podcasts, and it's the feeder site for like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So it's basically the hosting page, the landing page for the teasers before they go on to Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all the rest of it. And I've decided not to put the teasers onto Apple Podcasts because they're only there temporarily until the series is launched. So it just felt easier to just keep it on libsyn before launching the whole podcast. So we've launched the teasers. So there, I have a link for them that I can send you. And the actual podcast will be launched at the earliest July 2021. In terms of a book, yes, the plan was always to write a book after the podcast, because my medium has always been, both writing and audio. And I remember toiling with, which one comes first. And for me, I wanted to make the audio version of the story, the arts version of the story first before writing the book. So the book is going to start to be written, all being well, September of next year, and it will hopefully, all being well, be out in 2022.
Do you interact with the public, or are you a private person? And if you do you have like a Twitter or a Facebook page or something?
Yes, I'm not a private person. I'm very open. In fact, I've put so much of the facets of my journey on social media because, being working in the media anyway, working in the arts, I've always felt that stories inspire stories, and it's how we grow. It's certainly how I grow. I love listening to and watching other people's human stories because it's how I allow myself to see myself within them, So I'm very open, and I love engaging with people in public and everybody on social media. And I make a point to, because I feel like it's really important. So people can find me on Facebook, which is my name, Renu, Renu, Arora, Arora. And I'm on Twitter at Renu Arora 1.
Okay.
People can find me there.
All right, great. So we have a way to connect you. Before we wrap it up, do you have one last message that you can give us?
Oh, what a lovely question. Yeah, so I feel like I've come back with the belief that love is how we grow our soul. And so a question that I ask myself most days now and try to act on it is, where can I give more love? Either it's to myself, which then in turn helps me to give more love to other people, or it's actually to other people. And I often find myself going, I need to give more love, not just to family and friends, that too, and myself, but also to strangers and to the wider, the wider world and people that I don't know, because we just never know who's needing a smile on that day, and something that you say or do or a bit of eye contact could make that person's day, week, month. We just don't know.
Yeah.
So give love.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, I love that just a thought for yourself every day is just, how can I give more love today?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great. All right, Renu,
thanks, Jeff.
I really appreciate you giving me some time today.
Thank you.
I hope your podcast is massively successful.
Thank you.
And I hope that you're able to walk like you walked once before again soon.
Thank you very much, Jeff. That's so very kind. It's been so lovely. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, and have a wonderful day.
And you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.